Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. We're just going to give it a second for the Zoom to trickle everybody in. Apologies for the slight delay as we gathered here today. I think most of you have trickled in through the Zoom. So I'll begin with a brief introduction. Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for our live from the studio with Curator-in-Residence Melissa Feldman. My name is Bahar Mahazabnia, and I'm the Assistant Curator of Engagement at Griffin Art Projects. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that our work takes place on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh nations, to whom we are deeply grateful. I would also like to thank North Vancouver Recreation and Culture, as well as the Frieze Foundation, for their generous support of Griffin's residency programs. Lastly, I'll mention that there will be a chance for audience questions after Melissa has finished her presentation. But if at any point throughout the presentation you have questions for Melissa, please feel free to type them in the Q&A dialog box. We'll address these questions at the very end. You can also choose to raise your hand and ask your questions live. We won't be able to see you or hear you. Well, we will be able to hear you, but we won't be able to see you. And just to note that this event is being recorded. So if you choose to ask your question live, your voice will be recorded too. And we just like to encourage everyone to raise their hands to ask their questions out loud, as times it may seem like we're all just little boxes on the screen, and it's just lovely to hear everybody's voices being heard out loud in the Zoom. Without further ado, I'll briefly introduce Melissa and then pass it on to her to begin her presentation. As a native New Yorker who spent 2 decades on the West Coast, Melissa Feldman is a contemporary art curator and writer who specializes in novel curatorial approaches, the geo-cultural context of art, and identifying emergent artistic trends. In 2017, Feldman's A Cool Breeze, LA and Vancouver art from the 60s to now was presented at Griffin Art Projects, the first exhibition to observe the affinity for preconceptualist minimalism between the coastal cities. She's credited with organizing the first monographic exhibitions for artists such as Karen Kilimnik, Martin Kippenberger, Beverly Semmes, and Hiroshi Sugimoto as curator at the Institute of Contemporary Art, Philadelphia, in the 1990s. Recent traveling exhibitions include Indie Folk, New Art and Sound from the Pacific West Coast, organized by the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art in Pullman, Washington, Free Play, Independent Curators International, and Another Minimalism, Art After California Light and Space, Fruitmarket Gallery in Edinburgh. A contributor to Art in America, Canadian Art, and Frieze, among others, Feldman has taught at the California College of Art, the San Francisco Art Institute, the Cornish College for Arts, and Goldsmith College. And without further ado, Melissa, I'll pass it on to you.
Okay. Great to be with you all. I'm here in Vancouver at the residency at Griffin Art Projects, where I'm working on a show that will be opening in January that looks at, it's called Seriously, Comics and Comedy in Canadian Art, 1970s to the present. And so I wanted to, I didn't come up with that idea out of the blue. And I've been kind of on this track of kind of alternative figuration and kind of a folk aesthetic for a while. I was surprised to discover that this was a sensibility that you also find across Canada, not just where I knew it existed, for example, in the work of Vincent Trazov, who started Western Front. So there was kind of I had some touch points, but a little further on, we'll look at those, and I'll show you some that I found in the course of my research. A few days ago, I opened this show called Indie Folk, New Art and Sounds from the Pacific Northwest at the Hallie Ford Museum in Salem, Oregon. That's the last stop in a 5-city tour. Was in San Francisco, and otherwise mainly across the Northwest and in the lower 48. And this exhibition looks at an interest in handmaking and craft, grounded in folk traditions and just in kind of make-do rural lifestyle. And it features almost 20 artists who are either from the Northwest or have spent a significant amount of time there. So that is an installation view from the Snyder Museum of Art in Ashland. It was there, I think about 2 years ago. And you can see just at a glance all the different kinds of work that I had in the show. I had in the foreground, you'll see kind of furniture sculpture, hand carved with found and reclaimed, you know, local wood by an artist based in Portland, Oregon, Vince Skelly. And then behind that on the right, you'll see a quilt by Joey Veltkamp featuring all the names of the ferries in the Washington State ferry system. So I just wanted to point out those two pieces, which are easy to see. And here are a couple of other works in the show, just to show you the variety of mediums, many mediums connected to craft, and a kind of figuration and narrative that relates, not to like the Western art historical canon, but to indigenous art and folk art and vernacular styles. So here's another quilt by Joey Veltkamp. That's a sign, obviously a sign on the highway pointing to Bellevue, which has significance for the artist and his career. I won't go into that, but this is an example of another characteristic of this work, in that it's grounded in traditional methods, techniques, for example, quilting. But it's these methods are applied to a contemporary context. So a lot of craft, I find, is about recreation and replicas and sticking exactly to the tradition, and that's not the case with any of the works in the show. This goes for this hand-woven basket by the Okanagan artist Joe Feddersen. It's smallish, probably about 8 inches high, and it takes its form, its size, and its cylindrical form from traditional sally bags used by his people to, go foraging and gathering, things of that size. Different size baskets for gathering different kinds of materials. But you can see that the imagery on it, while it has initially the appearance of the graphic illustration you find in Columbia Plateau basketry, it's actually like one figure kind of looks like Batman, another one looks like an alien. So so it's very witty, very witty piece. Then you have a tall ceramic jug by Jeffrey Mitchell with a couple at the top. It's kind of reminiscent of a wedding cake. And this was uh, uh, meant as a celebration of the legalization of gay marriage in the States. about 10 years ago. And at the far right, you have Warren Dykeman, a Seattle-based artist whose painting is kind of combines a kind of rough-hewn folk imagery with elements of typography and graphic design. And in his hands, these, even though there's letters and kind of text and figures, doesn't add up at all to a story. So he's kind of going against the grain in that sense. Here's just a couple more pieces from the show. On the upper right, a basket that's about a big basket. It's about like 20 inches wide, made by Marita Dingus, an African-American artist based in Washington State, who uses recycled materials as a scavenger for materials and fashions a lot of objects out of them, and also has a long-standing and ongoing practice of yard art, which is a very classic kind of African-American folk form, because if you wanted to make stuff and you wanted to display it, you know, in the 1920s, you certainly weren't going to be getting your work in a gallery. So a lot of artists just made the home base their working space and their exhibition space. So I think that in her work, there's a relationship to African power figures, which are made from accumulated objects. And a lot of times there are shiny things meant to attract the spirits, and were for protection. So it's kind of an adaptation of traditional African forms in the present day America. And Jessica Jackson Hutchins, I'm not going to go into it because it's complicated, but that's a painting. And in this case, she's reusing a painting she had laying around in her studio, and has draped that over a folding ladder and added a ceramic. And then a 102-year-old artist based in Eastern Washington, kind of on the prairie, named Galen Hansen. And his work kind of combines Augustinex modernism with a folk aesthetic. And many feature this character called Colonel, his alter ego, and is about kind of life on his land, and with bugs and flowers, and just his Colonel's encounter with nature. And nature is often depicted as very, you know, quite a force in his work. So I think hopefully that gives you a sense of the sensibility I noticed going on in the Northwest. This is not, this is the first show to kind of identify this as a Northwest tendency, and also talks about some of the roots of that tendency and the craft movement earlier in the last century. Just a couple, I'm not, I have a lot to get through, so I'm just gonna skim here. More work from indie folk. So you see there's glass, and then there are these small, like paperback book-sized pieces by Dan May in Salem, Oregon, who you know, made completely of scavenged materials, papers from there were many thrift shops that he would scour on a regular basis. And then Cappy Thompson, who does this reverse glass painting, that picks up on kind of Indian folk. like Warley painting, and also there's a kind of a medieval, Western medieval sensibility, all that kind of pre-modern, very flat, no perspective is of interest to her. So, the show for the Griffin started with a conversation with Adrian Norvid, pictured here, with his piece called Autopsy. And so he often incorporates, there's like a performative element to his work. And I met him through the grapevine, and I became familiar with his work, and it kind of, I was kind of on this track of a funky, funny, kind of informal, kind of mocking, political satire, I was just kind of in that lane of, with working on indie folk and looking at kind of historical precursors. And then I come upon Adrian's work, and his work definitely goes along those lines. And so I started talking to him about whether, there were more artists like him working in Canada. Because when I think of Canadian art, I think of Jeff Wall and conceptual photography. I don't think of figuration, and uh, I don't think of humor. And so we brainstormed a little bit, but then I realized actually I can think of some people who whose work I was already familiar with, such as Vincent Trazoff, with his ongoing alter ego, Mr. Peanut. He So I was aware of this series, just from my mainly exposed to Canadian art through trips to Vancouver while I was based in Seattle. Mr. Peanut started in the 70s. These drawings are from, their ink and wash are from, last year. So he's had a long life, Mr. Peanut. And at the beginning of his life, he was a costume that Vincent wore and ran for mayor mayor of Vancouver in 1974, as a kind of a 20-day performance. Here are some other artists whose work came to mind when I was thinking about Canadian art that deals with cartoon and figuration. There's Judy Chartrand, who's now a Sobey finalist. Oops, sorry, I keep on doing that. Ceramic plate of hers, my back, my neck. Uh, so taking, traditional, kind of indigenous, I think she is Cree kind of figuration, and kind of cartooning it. And also, it's like, tragic comedy, because I think she's talking about the state of the, the physical state of indigenous people, and kind of the wear and tear on the body for indigenous people for, various socioeconomic reasons. I was also aware of Sonny Asu's work. I had seen his work in a show at the Vancouver Art Gallery, and I knew that he was taking kind of these these motifs, indigenous motifs, and isolating them and blowing them up and treating them in this very kind of graffiti-esque fashion. And also using actual, collaging actual comics, as he does in this piece called Last Hope. And Last Hope, that sounds like again, maybe there's tragic comedy going on here with the title. I have not seen this piece in person yet, so I haven't had a chance to scrutinize it and get the story, but I will find out, and hopefully you will find out when you come and see the show, which opens late January. I was also aware of Sean Hunt's work, another Indigenous artist, but I didn't know this piece, this giant stuffed totem pole. So, great comment on, the whole souvenir economy and appropriation of and monetization of Indigenous culture. So there was that piece, and then of, more contemporary artists. And then I was also aware of Victor Sikansky because he was affiliated with the Bay Area. Now I'm in California, Northern California. It's not just Bay Area, it's actually Northern California funk art movement, which was very ceramics forward. And so he's from Regina, and but he did spend some time in Northern California, and he's an artist who has this kind of lighthearted approach. He's a storyteller. It's autobiographical. It's about his life as a kind of a homesteader, growing all his own food and preserving it. And so you'll see this is root cellar. The rest of his body presumably is in the cellar. And so they're kind of very, colorful, playful, and kind of toy-like, although I think all of these elements are actually life-size in this piece. I did not know about Shivani Ashuna's work, an Indigenous artist, and I was aware of this sensibility of Indigenous. I think I knew about Annie Puduguk. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Apologies if not. Who and that there was this kind of uh, there's a lot of illustration going on. This is, ink drawing and this gridded format, which is, obviously like a comic strip, and, with these small moments isolated. And oops, sorry about that. So that was kind of another, there's the Inuit contribution. Then I discovered Gary Pearson, who is Gary Pearson's work, and so his subject matter is he always has these simple kind of drawing like paintings with text, which is kind of a like comics, and he's not telling a whole story, well, not in these, but generally it's the title of the work, Mystic Fountain on the left and Man Standing on the Edge of the World on the right. And so again, there's this kind of a naive aesthetic going on. This very flat, tipped perspective, and simplified figuration that is reminiscent of cartoon. And even though there's a melancholy quality to the work, for some reason I think it's funny. There's something overly dramatic about the scene of these, like this couple actually, mesmerized by that fountain. I also get like there's an undercurrent of of humor in the work, I find. Same for Maxwell Bates, who's another discovery in the course of organizing the show, who was based out in Saskatchewan. And this piece called Prairie People, and his work is among the earliest in the show. And so once again, the naive figuration, the kind of a genre scene, and then you have these youngsters, I don't know, because of their size. It's hard to tell how old they are, but this guy is kind of copping a feel here. Um, it's not the main event, but given the expressions of the adults and the hand on the chest, they seemed uh perturbed or like kind of suffering. But in the midst of that, you have this little teenage lust going on. So back to Victor Sikansky. I'm mentioning him because from his work, I want to get into some of the Bay Area funk artists who he was cavorting with out in Northern California. And kind of the seat of this activity was University of California at Davis, which is near Sacramento, kind of northern central California. And there was a great program there. And it was there in the 60s that clay started to be considered a material that you could use as a sculptor. And and it didn't have to be abstract and serious. It could be figurative and silly. So David Gilhooly, just going from Sikansky with, there's a lot of food, and kind of not, very much everyday, everyday food, not, we're not seeing canapes and glasses of champagne as you might with, a John Singer Sargent painting. So he throws frogs in a lot. And so here's a breakfast with frogs, and then a sampler. The Gahuli also made the box for this, and all the little bonbons are feature frogs and kind of interrupting little sandwiches. I don't know if I have a close-up of that. I guess I don't. But the kind of the ringleader of funk was Robert Arneson, who did a lot of self-portraits. And here's one of a classic Robert Arneson, California artist, kind of taking classical portraiture and which is so official and formal and about, image making and power. and totally upending that idea with the artist in his jean jacket and and the plinth decorated with like a marijuana plant. Um, Here's, I thought this was funny. Even in a public sculpture that he did, he's um uh making fun of, it's like a lot of public sculpture winds up just being a place for birds to perch. And then there's also the idea of the fountain and as kind of a giant bird bath. So I think that's why he has this actually looks like a duck perched on like a uh, bronze cast bronze kind of wooden plank that he's balancing on his head. And here's an earlier piece from the 60s, a typewriter in which all the keys are these painted fingernails. Um, so, uh, and then there's Maja Peoples Bright, one of the few women who's originally Latvian, one of the few women associated with California funk. There's a close-up from this painting, the Peacock Peaks. A lot of um, just very, very imaginative, very playful. Um, she's always creating these fantastical worlds that are partly made of the creatures themselves. It almost looks like those peacocks instead of foliage. They're um, she kind of substitutes foliage for peacocks because you don't have any there. None of them uh, are kind of airborne. Not that peacocks are, but I don't know. It's just there are these very kind of fun, incongruous situations. And here's another artist associated with California funk named Roy DeForest. And there's just so much of his work I had a hard time picking. So I thought, oh, I'll just load up this slide. You can see how he makes his own frames and they're modeled or like with carved wood. Um, and again, very free, very comical, no fear. You'll find a lot of animals in this work, in funk work. Here's Roy DeForest. Again, I did like this one. This is called Painting with the Big Painting, which is, of course, Picasso's Demoiselle d'Avignon. And I have to I can stop there if people would like to ask questions at this point, or I do have some more images if people would like to see more.
Maybe a few more images as people type their questions in the Q&A box or raise their hands to indicate that they'd like to ask a question.
Okay. The problem is that the wrong presentation got loaded, so I would need help doing that. I don't know if Lisa's available.
No problem. We'll ask
At the
Lisa,
end
but
of the day,
maybe
that was not my final, but
we can go straight to questions. It's no problem at all.
okay,
While
let's do
the
that.
Yeah, while the audience is typing away, maybe I could start by asking the first
Oh, okay.
question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a very exciting show. I'm very excited to see it and watch it all come together. And I have a couple of questions about it, and they're more general questions, but I'm just curious as to what inspired this show. And as you prepare for the exhibition, what messages or experiences are you hoping to convey to the visitors, or like what kinds of specific conversations you hope the
Hmm.
exhibition would spark?
That's a good question. Um, well, for me, it's a look at um, work in this vein uh, nationally and across the country. And as I was finding artists, Lisa Baldessara, the director, was saying, this is really interesting because normally, you don't see this work together, and also an artist like um artists kind of don't show, I guess, like Maxwell Bates um hasn't shown much in Vancouver. Artists tend to show where they're based in Canada and the different, in the various provinces. So as Lisa described it, the art world here can be kind of siloed. So I think because I'm not Canadian and I'm not aware of those groupings, those kind of categories. So I'm just looking at work that shares a sensibility and an approach, which is kind of uh, it's a little bit radical. It's irreverent. It's not uh it's unconventional, both in the type of figuration, because a lot of the work reminds me more of folk, or so-called outsider art or self-taught, or with the crudeness of the figuration, which is beautiful. I mean, it's just as beautiful as um a Monet painting, or an Italian Renaissance. It is a different sensibility. It's not about refinement in that sense. So, and I think so. Besides kind of showing audiences the breadth of work in this vein across the country, and also kind of two generations worth, I would say, if you're starting in the 70s with artists who emerged in the 70s. But besides that, I wanted to show Canada's place in a more international dialogue, or certainly in the States, but I guess I should really speak more for Western Europe, because I know that the best. But there's been, it's been gaining momentum over the past 10, 15 years of an interest in breaking down the separations between craft and fine art. So um if weavers aren't, depending on the weaving, it all depends on the work. It doesn't matter whether you're weaving it or whether it's made of ceramic. It can all be art. Even if it's functional, it can still be art. Um, and so there's been a lot of interest in breaking down those boundaries, which also allows in a lot of marginalized voices and artistic practices, you know, into the mainstream, and kind of leveling the playing field. And the same goes for style, that vernacular references, and you don't have to go to Yale. Um, that's like the one of the top programs in the States. You don't have to have a master's from Yale. I don't know what your equivalent program is here, but um, you can learn how to make things from your community or from your relatives. And so, and I think that the humor and the casualness and the lightheartedness and the storytelling and things being personal, that's all part of that picture. It's, uh, things, because for so long, especially in the States, as an artist to be taken seriously, like especially post-war, like from the 50s to the 80s, you had to do, your work had to be very formal and abstract. Even color was suspect. So that was a very long answer to your question, but did I answer the whole question?
You did, yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Lisa is asking you, Melissa, if you could go back to the first few slides to the earlier show in Oregon to show the origin again of how all of this came together.
Ooh, ooh, get ready. You're gonna get dizzy. Okay. That one?
Yes, and Lisa has a question that she's going to
Okay.
ask now.
Hi, Melissa. Thank you so much for this. I just love seeing this origin story here with this earlier project.
Mm-hmm.
And what really strikes me is, well, two things. One is just how prominent the maker is in this work. Like when
Mm.
I'm looking at it, I can't help but think about, um, the attention to the craft, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
the craft of painting or, you've included the furniture. Um, and I think it's so, I mean, I can see that in the show you're developing for Griffin. And I really love this sort of discursive space of like you're connecting to the maid without it necessarily being connected to formalism, you know? And so we start
I'm
to really
sorry, you said connecting to what without it being?
to the made, like how something's
Oh, uh-huh,
made, our attention to the
uh-huh.
materials. But it does manage to sidestep a conversation about formalism, which comes from a certain art historical trajectory, which I think
Mm-hmm.
is really interesting. And I see it, like I said, in the show you're developing for Griffin. And I really love this. You were talking about one of the artists as well in the exhibition who, knowing that for all kinds of reasons around inequity and racial inequity, they may not find their way into a museum context. And so this is something that even could be in the front yard. You were describing
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I just
Yeah, it's a
want,
great comment.
well, and also the strategy that you have, because it's such a welcome one, because there have been so many rigid hierarchies around form. And so by exploring funk and by exploring folk and comedy, I feel like, as comedy is, you're disrupting hierarchies with this work. And I wondered if you see it that way as well. These kind of art world.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Um, so it's kind of a double-edged sword comedy because it's disrupting kind of it's I don't know, something about comedy is you can snub your nose at it. It's like uh low class or something. Um, it's about entertainment. So um yeah, so it's definitely breaking taboo. But on the other hand, I also really I myself am a very audience conscious curator, and I like the idea that the humor makes the work more accessible to people. It can make for a more entertaining art show if maybe you don't love art, but you like a good joke. Who doesn't like a good joke? So some of the work in the show will certainly provide that. So it's sometimes I find contemporary art can sometimes draw a limited audience because people are afraid. They think they're not going to understand it. And so I like to think of ways to bring the audience in and make them feel comfortable and give them kind of a hook into the work.
Yeah, there's a lot of pleasure in it too, with the humor and those materials that are kind of within the imaginable. Like I can imagine makers coming into this space and going, I want to try that. Or maybe I'll try my hand at painting. Like you create a kind of hinge by including.
Absolutely. With this show, there were, I always say there's something for everyone. There are even, I didn't show them, but there are these little toy-like handmade wooden objects. Of course, the artist Brian Beck makes them with traditional, like 19th century German hand tools. Um, and I love how a lot of the methods are also, people want to, artists want to, I well, probably Joey Veldkamp who quilts. I think he uses a machine, but also sewing machines have been around for a long time, and some is hand done. Um,
Can you also comment? There was a work, I think it's the slide number 3, like 2 more slides. And I know you were feeling a bit rushed because we had a late start, but I was curious about, I think it's the next one, the one after that one, this painting. Just wondered if you could say a little bit more.
Oh yeah, this is Andrea Joyce Heimer's work, and it's all autobiographical. Um, this is covering, the title is The Big Sky Rodeo Finals that summer were marked by a flash lightning storm, a horse fight, and my first hand job in a haystack. This is quite a large painting, and it is done in, so she grew up as kind of an unwelcomed adopted daughter in Billings, Montana. And so all her work is about the trauma of that experience. But at the same time, there's the beauty of this kind of small town life. And so first of all, what's crafty about her painting is number one, the paints she used come from a hobby shop. They're, water-based acrylics. At this time, I think she's experimenting with more proper, uh, so to speak, art materials now. But so they have a beautiful quality. They're kind of the quality is like tempera, kind of matte surface. And then she elaborately tapes these paintings because they're so intricate, and every little leg on a horse, they're kind of like acute triangles. That's all taped out with tiny pieces of masking tape to get her sharp lines. So to my mind, it's a very kind of labor-intensive, crafty technique. And then of course the kind of figuration, which is simplified, and it's her inspiration comes from Plains, ledger drawings of the Plains Indians, which is, in her territory in Montana. She's now based in Washington and has been for a long time. But also, black and red Greek pottery, kind of the frieze of figures on that work. So there's a lot of, and a lot of the artists' work is like this, where the kind of folk or primitive, in quotes, or pre-modern references can come from anywhere. Could be, Persian miniatures or ancient Greek vases, as well as kind of more local references. So I thought that was interesting, like where she's pulling inspiration from. But it's on I think the hand job, for anyone who's interested, is happening on the lower right. And on the lower left is some guy being dragged out on a stretcher, bleeding. You see like the blood drops on the ground. And I can't see it here, but I think there's like an empty bottle of whiskey on the ground somewhere around there. So it's kind of the sordid side of the rodeo.
So interesting. Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
and it's 2019. Like it's amazing because it's got this kind of timeless feeling because of all the references you talk about.
Yeah, yeah. And look at where the horizon line is. Way up there.
Yeah.
That pink, you know, sunset sky in the mountain range.
Oh, great.
Yeah. While I'm at it, is there somebody else, Bahar?
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I may as well talk about Blair Saxon Hill, who was based in Portland. She's now in LA. But she's from Eugene, Oregon, and this is all scavenged materials. Um, and like around the neck, that little ruff is a badminton birdie a broken badminton birdie that she found. So I just love this piece because I find that it's incredibly elegant, and kind of almost regal portrait, but made of, basically debris, just parts of things that people throw out, like the wicker. And then she'll cobble these pieces together. She just brings a lot of stuff into the studio and cobbles it together using cement and paper mache and hydrocal, and then painting over it. So there's a lot of sculpting and alteration going on in there that's semi-concealed under paint.
Wonderful. Thank you. Um, there's no questions in the chat, but I will ask a final wrap-up question.
Okay,
Give everyone a minute to type any final questions they may have away, and then we'll wrap it up from there. How does that sound?
good.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the sort of this vast geographic scope of the project. And I know you've kind of been balancing this East Coast, West Coast trajectory, this back and forth between the two very I want to say vastly different, but I'm actually not quite sure. When we talk about regionalism, I know that I am very regionalist, especially in the way I think about contemporary art. So I was wondering, in your experiences, do you see any sort of overlapping trends, any vast differences in what's coming up in contemporary arts?
East and between East Coast and West Coast in the States.
Yeah, just generally, like again, being someone who is so regionalist in the way,
Yeah.
I think just through
And
being,
what region do you associate with? Like, what region do you know? Is it
I
BC?
am, it's BC, it's very Vancouver based. To be
Uh-huh.
honest, if I were to go to Montreal, I'd be lost.
Oh, wow. Okay. And do you think of the art, I'm just curious, do you think of the art scene here as kind of more conceptually driven? Like
Definitely.
idea-based art and media, photography, video,
Yes,
performance. Yeah.
definitely. I was, a side note, I was in Iran recently, and it was like I was on a different planet when it came to the art
Mm,
scene.
mm-hmm,
Totally
mm-hmm.
different geography though, but it was just a
Yeah,
lot more formal.
yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Huh.
Mhm.
Um, wow, talk about contrast. East Coast,
Uh,
West Coast, the States seems like, yeah, uh, cut from the same cloth. But I think that actually this whole West Coast countercultural sensibility in the States is having an impact on the East Coast more and more. We are um there's not as much, let's put it this way, the East Coast knows the West Coast, knows a lot less about the West Coast than the West Coast knows about the East Coast. And there is a rivalry, and part of the development of the funk movement and not painting, but doing ceramics, working with found objects um, uh, was a counter to like the East Coast hegemony in the art world, and this kind of abstract expressionism was the first American art movement, and also signaled, well, what America likes to say is the shift from the center of the art world from Paris to New York. And so that has so dominated American art across the country for so long. There was, um, well, our numbers are not that big in America. So at least for a generation or two, when I say the dominance of ABEX, and that rolled into minimalism, which is also very formalist and, you know, anti-pictorial. Um, so so I think that I guess I would make that's an interesting kind of drama that's playing out now. Um, and also I don't want to give the idea that these artists on the West Coast, they were making that work only like to rebel against East Coast abstract expressionism or minimalism and the kind of the constraints. It was also what they wanted to do. And so many of the artists started out as abstract painters, and they didn't want to do that. So it was like a whole nother persona for the artist that you could like have fun. And yeah, so I have a lot still to learn about understanding all these different practices across Canada and across two generations, and different kind of ancestries and nationalities. Uh, and so I think of it as kind of an experimental show, because I see a visual. I'm reading the work as connected, but what's behind that, I don't know. So
Yeah, it sounds like humor and radical fun as a pedagogy. for the
Definitely. There you go.
exhibition. Yes,
That sums it right up. Thank you.
wonderful. We do
And the
have,
show opens January 24th from 6 to 8 p.m., right, Lisa?
You got
Yeah.
it.
I think that's right. Yeah. And it continues through May 18th.
wonderful, great. We've got
Oh.
one question in the chat that we'll answer and then wrap up.
Okay.
Okay, we've got a question from Gary Pearson, and they are asking, I'm wondering where you'd place Edward Kienholz, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong,
That's
in
correct.
the aesthetic of the West Coast and American contemporary art generally.
Mm. Definitely related to, he's an in-between figure, because on one hand he relates to some of the kind of realism, especially in terms of sculpture that was going on, like George Siegel and Dwayne Hanson, with kind of lifelike, realistic figures. Kienholz is much darker, and so the tone of the work is is darker and has more is more political, but still definitely another macho guy making sculpture. And I am not an expert in Kienholz, and I don't so I think that's all I can really say about that relationship, but certainly, you know, the interest in vernacular scenes, kind of, you know, Saturday night in the out in the hood, you know, guys in cars, and um that kind of narrative. So, but that's something to think about. Thanks, Gary.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Melissa.
Thank you so
It's been
much.
so exciting to
Thanks to
hear
the
this
audience for your
project.
patience with the start.
Yes, but we made it. We made it through, and it was wonderful. So thank you. Thank you for
Thank
your
you so
time,
much.
Melissa. Yes.
All right.
And as you mentioned, the exhibition will open on January 24th. Yes, so to the audience, we hope to see you there at the opening reception from 6 to 8. And right now at Griffin, the Future Worldings exhibition is on until December 15th, and we are open Friday, Saturday, Sunday, noon to 5 p.m. Great. Thank you, Melissa. And I wish everyone a wonderful rest of their Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.